Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Hello, my darlings. Today I'm bringing you part 5 of the series by JXB Paperboy that started with subject 13. This one's entitled Conversations at a Mental Ward. Peter lay on a hammock in his office, staring up at the ceiling. Curiously, the knight in his office painting stepped down from it. Just moments ago, the knight had driven a sword through the chest of Sean Wing, subject 14 of cell block 13. Neither had spoken a word to each other since they had returned, and neither wanted to be the one to start the conversation. Finally, Peter sighed through his mouth loudly. "Why did you stab him?" The knight melted out of his painting and touched down in front of him. He turned to the hammock, folding his hands in front of him. The voice emanating from the ghost echoed behind the face mask of his helmet. "You realize that some of these subjects need discipline, Peter." Peter looked at the ghost from the corner of his eye. He bent a leg so his knee pointed up and folded his other leg over it. "And you realize that these subjects are not here because they want to be. A lot of them are like 13 and 14. They can't control what's happening around them. Show a bit of compassion." The knight stood still. The security chief began bouncing his leg. Another stretch of silence passed. Then the knight spoke first. "And what about the guards that can't control what's going on around or to them?" Peter stopped bouncing his leg. His forehead wrinkled into a frown, and he lifted his head up to look at the knight in ghostly armor. He spoke softly. "Everyone in this mental ward is here for their own good, even the guards." In the courtyard, 2 subjects sat together on a bench. One was a girl with tattered rags and skin and muscle that barely clung to her bones. The other was a boy with 2 humps underneath his shoulder blades. Subject 13 and 14 sat silently. The wind blew through the courtyard, howling softly in the background. Subject 13 shivered at the sound of the howling, despite the voices in her ears remaining quiet. Subject 14 leaned on his knees and listened to the howling, eyes closed. Across the courtyard, a young boy approached them. The boy was small, hunched his shoulders in and looked around the courtyard, shaking at the knees. His blue eyes were wide and darted across the courtyard, as if they were shivering. The boy, subject 11, sat down next to 14 on the bench, clutching his small arms with bony hands. The wind continued to blow. "Something's going to happen soon," 11 whispered. Subject 13 looked at him while 14 kept staring ahead. An apparition appeared in front of them, male, tall, and a bloody slit through his transparent chest. To 13 it spoke. "He may speak the truth, 13. The voice echoed in their ears and 11's eyes widened. He stared at the ghost, his lips parted and frozen. Slowly he raised his hand and pointed at him. "Emran." The hand came out of one of 14's humps and placed itself on 11's head. 11's hand did not move. Emran looked back and forth between his host and the boy. As quickly as he appeared, he faded away from existence in their plane of reality. However, 11's hand still pointed at the spot where Emran was. 14 got up and walked off, muttering to himself. 13 and 11 remained silent, sharing in the silence of the moment. The wind died, and 13 felt eyes on her. She looked around and saw a small figure sitting in the middle of a patch of grass nearby. 11 pointed at the figure this time, but looked at the older girl curiously. Do you see one over there too? 13 nodded. I see a lot of them. 14 sees them too. Our security guard sees it. His boss sees them too. 11 touched the older subject's arm with a finger. 13 looked at him through matted brown hair. His bangs hung low over his forehead, and shoulders shook with his blue eyes. Do they do things to you? 13 paused. Her throat tightened a little, and a small chill went up her neck. The wind blew again, and someone whispered in her ear. A strand of her hair fell loose, obscuring her vision of the child. She brushed her hair over her head and frowned. They did. She stopped. A lot of them did things to me that I didn't like. 11 looked up at her. But something happened. They listen to you now. I heard it happen last night. I hear the ghosts talking to each other when you're not listening. 13 immediately thought of Wendell, the ghost who used to take charge over the others. Her head still throbbed from when Wendell hit her months ago. A bead of sweat made its way down her neck as the two sat in silence. A figure walked across the courtyard, catching the attention of both subjects. The figure stopped, looked at them, and disappeared with a gust of wind. The younger patient nudged closer to the older subject, 13, shivering. His voice shook with his body. Why can we see them? 13 stared at an empty stone bench across the way. She stared and stared and stared even more. In her ears the wind turned to a low humming, and her vision darkened. The humming grew and grew until it enveloped her sense of hearing, and then someone tugged at her arm, breaking her memory. The bells of the mental ward rang, signaling the end of recess. Sean stood in front of her, his eyes looking down on her over humped shoulders. Next to her was an empty seat on the bench. Subject 14's voice rang in her ear. It's time to go. Subjects 14 and 11 sat together in the cafeteria. In front of both of them were identical trays of mash, unattractive and distasteful. From his back, 14 had brought a hand forward and fed himself. Next to him, 11 looked at himself, on 14's spoon. Without looking up, he asked the older patient, Do you see them too? Like 11, 14 spoke without meeting or attempting to meet 11's eyes. See what? 11 looked down at his tray and shifted uncomfortably with his hands underneath him. You know. His eyes swung left, then right, looking for something. Them. 14's hands did not stop, shoveling food into his mouth. Yeah, I know you do too. Everyone in our hall can see them. 11's eyes slowly brought themselves to look at 14. They do? Subject 14 nodded, chewing on the mush he had just put in his mouth. He chewed quickly, then swallowed. I wouldn't worry about them. Most of them only bother 13 for some reason. It's only during her therapy sessions and at night for some reason. Don't know why. 14 picked up another chunk of mush and put it in his mouth. 11 took a moment to let him chew. A shadow flicked in the corner of his eyes, and he turned with a jolt in his seat. The beating in his chest quickened for a moment before a pressure placed itself on his head and turned forward. I told you not to worry about them, 11, 14 scolded. Words stammered out of 11 nervously. I know, but it always feels like they're watching me. Dr. Q said I was special, and that's why I could see them, but the pressure on his head squeezed as it turned him to face the cold gray eyes of Subject 14. Look, kid, there are only 3 things you need to worry about in this place. The first one is that security guard of ours, with the 2 wraiths hanging around him. The second one is whoever the current security chief is. You mean Mr. Gates? The pressure on his head ruffled his hair a little. Yeah, that's the one. There's been a lot of different security chiefs during my time here. He's lasted the longest. Doesn't strike me as the abusive type. Then why do I need to worry about him? A slammed echoed off the table, bench and floor around them. 11 flinched and looked up at 14. On his face, a very toothy grin stretched from ear to ear, flashing teeth stained with yellow and bits of mush stuck between them. The pressure on his head pressed down, and 11 brought his hand up and gripped the invisible hand holding his head hostage. 14's shoulders began to shake as a low chuckle built from his lungs. 11's teeth rattled in the low chatter as 14's chuckle built into a laugh. The people around the cafeteria shifted nervously. 11's heart crept up to his throat, and 14 kept laughing, the pressure on 11's head pressing down and down, seemingly with all intent to hurt him, but never truly hurting him. Both sat until 14 finally gave his response. It's that goddamn knight that keeps following him. So how is our equipment coming along, Shade? Egio looked over the guard's shoulder as he worked over a workbench. He lifted a steel handle as long as his forearm up to the light and twisted a bolt into place at one end. From the other end of the handle, a metal rod doubled the length of the handle, and a third longer than his security baton. Shade examined the handle and seemed satisfied. Placed back on the workbench and picking up another one was a similar design, and twisted a bolt at the end. There was a loud noise of a spring snapping inside the handle, and Shade sighed. He placed the handle back down on the workbench. Hand me that Phillips head, Ichio. The wraith obliged, placing the screwdriver into his hand and returning to a spot over Shade's left shoulder. Dye materialized behind Shade, twirling a ghostly imitation of the working handle. Only a few more days, boys. Do you think we'll be ready? Shade pulled the handle apart, revealing the spot where the spring failed to uncoil. He calmly removed the spring and replaced it with a new one. It depends on whether or not I can get this one to work. After finishing putting everything back together, the security guard put down his tools and walked over to a nearby table. He pulled out a rolled-up piece of paper and unrolled it, revealing an intricate diagram of boxes. To his wraith companions he spoke. There's still one final piece to this. So quoth, this raven... This one is getting really good. I hope we see more of this. It's a quite interesting concept. Thank you all for coming to my library to spend some time with me. I do so appreciate it. And special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Ermin, Darren and Jennifer, Laura, Mutant Artificial Intelligence, Tabby Cat, and, of course, Charlotte Emerson. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.